Now, on to our second case. This is where a woman who was trying to start a new life was found killed and dismembered in a river bottom. On October 27th, Amy Ruby Legans was reported missing after her family said that they hadn't heard from her for 6 days. Cops initially identified 61-year-old Timothy Sullivan as a potential suspect, and here's why. Because when Ruby moved to Arizona from Illinois over the summer, again, this is all part of that fresh start, right? Everything's going to be better. She met Timothy Sullivan through a friend, and the two started dating. But during their relationship, Timothy Sullivan allegedly assaulted Ruby, and it turns out that he had a violent criminal history of domestic violence, which we will detail in just a bit. So, again, most people are killed by people they know, right? Not saying automatically that he's going to be a suspect, but he was certainly on the short list. And then what happened solidified his position to be moved up to suspect number one.
Yeah, the standard operating procedure, every homicide investigation or missing person investigation actually is, back in my day, years ago, it was you found the phone book, the personal phone book of the missing person or the victim of a homicide, and 80% of the time you were going to find the name of the person responsible, or at least someone who was going to give you important information inside that book. Today, I imagine it's cell phone records. Have replaced all that, but it's the first step of trying to locate somebody or identify a suspect in a homicide.
Well, police say that Timothy went to great lengths to cover up his crime and dispose of Ruby's body, but in doing so, he actually left a trail of evidence. So police initially contacted Sullivan, and they say that he was living with an ex-girlfriend in Scottsdale, Arizona. They interviewed him about a week before Ruby Legans' body was actually discovered. Sullivan allegedly told police that he had met Ruby before. Yeah, okay, they dated a little bit, but they really were not in a relationship. That's what he said. So this is when the evidence starts coming out. Authorities say that they found a bottle of bleach, latex gloves, a scrub brush, bedding, and a duffel bag inside of Sullivan's car at that Scottsdale address where he was staying with his ex-girlfriend. Items in the car, as well as items found during a sweep of Sullivan's property, plus a search of his cell phone records, led to the discovery of Ruby's body, according to investigators. Investigators searched the home with a search warrant. This was the Scottsdale home. And that's where they found something bizarre. They say the backyard area was covered in mulch and that there were burned pieces which were later identified as human hair, women's clothing, and a bracelet. Okay, how often do we see that the killers try to burn the bodies of their victims? We see this all the time.
It's pretty common in some sort of, aftermath of, oh my gosh, what just happened, or I've done this. How am I going to hide the fact that I've done this? And then that usually ends up in some incredibly clumsy or even multiple clumsy attempts to cover it up.
So as a result of searching and mining his cell phone records and where he had been through his GPS, they located Ruby. So on November 17th, part of Ruby's body was found near a river bottom in Phoenix. Her body showed obvious signs of trauma, obviously. On November 25th, Sullivan was taken into police custody, and according to the records, Sullivan allegedly admitted to killing Ruby after they had an argument. He said she was yelling at him and that he snapped. Okay, I find this interesting, and here's why. Because ultimately, he doesn't get charged with murder one. He gets charged with second-degree murder. So, I mean, are they buying this whole, fit of passion, snap thing? This always drives me crazy, honestly. It really does. There is a woman who is dead. Her body parts are scattered all over the place. She clearly died a hideous, violent death. How is this not murder one?
It's when the case arrives at the district attorney's office, the district attorney, will usually take a look at it and said, what is my most likely conviction? And unfortunately, and who's to say, right or wrong to it, but the district attorneys that I've worked with in the past would generally, on homicide cases, will generally charge what they would consider charge up and say, we can prove second degree murder here, which might be a heat of passion type of murder. However, I'm an advocate for the victim here. I don't have the victim's side of the story other than the trauma and, the other forensic evidence that I might be able to obtain. So I'm going to file a first degree murder, and then we'll let this play out. Because that's the only way at this point I can advocate for the victim.
I agree with you.
But again, in any district attorney is generally a political position, and I don't know specifically in Arizona or for that county what the filing criteria might be. There may have been some sort of an arrangement that was worked out with the district attorney and the investigating officers at the time of the confession, but I don't want to speculate too much on that, but I would agree with you, Anna, that it just seems a little bit out of place that based on the circumstances, you would take what was already in your hand versus filing the charge that actually advocates for the victim.
Well, I think what I am willing to believe here is that he cooperated and admitted, and if that's the case, that there was some kind of deal and could have also helped with the location of all of Ruby. I suppose that's a negotiation that could have taken place. We don't know. We're just speculating here. So Sullivan went on to say to investigators that he choked her to death and then he left her body in her Chandler apartment for 2 days. This may be the negotiation, meaning he's telling them how it happened, where he did it, where she is, and maybe that's why it's a slightly lesser charge. So then he tells the cops that he wrapped her body in a tarp and then he buried her in the backyard there in Scottsdale, Arizona. But the idiot became worried. Yes, this is what he's worried about, right? He was so worried, Sullivan, that he allegedly exhumed the body, and then he decided he's going to chop up Ruby's body because that way it'll be easier to get rid of her in separate plastic bags inside trash cans throughout the area. So Ruby was chopped up and dispersed in multiple locations, not just what they found of Ruby in the bottom of the river. Ultimately, it was dental records that were used to identify Ruby's remains. Investigators say that Sullivan indicated that his actions were spontaneous and heinous in nature. Oh, isn't that lovely that he actually agreed that it was heinous? You know what it is? It always gets to me at my core. I always feel that our justice system always seems to be tilted so much more away from the victim, right? It's always a horrible process for the victim. Look, there can be no justice. We can't get Ruby back, but it just drives me crazy that's what bugs me to my core.
Yeah, there seems to be an ebb and flow, right? There'll be some sort of political sweep through that would say and I'm not advocating for one side or another as much as just observing, and from my seat in a police car observing, there'll be a push towards more restorative justice and restorative, types of systems. And then there seems to be an ebb and flow where the restorative almost always gets followed by a little bit of a spike in certain types of crimes. And then all of a sudden we'll get things like the Victims' Bill of Rights, and we're going to 3 strikes laws. And at any given time, there doesn't ever seem to be a balance in the middle, at least in my 31 years of law enforcement, that yes, sometimes absolutely restorative is the way that we should be approaching some of these things, but then there needs to be an accountability and a punitive aspect, and murder would seem to always be one of those punitive things. And regardless of most of the circumstances, that there is, we seem to be in an area now that it's almost like a rubber stamp process, and we have a dead person at on the front side of that process.
Well, but Eric, here's why I take such exception here, and why I'm just at my core so angry at this Sullivan guy, because he has a violent history against women. He nearly killed another woman, according to a former victim of his. And he was out on probation when he did this to Ruby. Okay? So that makes me very angry that this could have been avoidable. Let's look at Timothy's background. So Susan Davidson of Phoenix, Arizona, told TV station KPNX that Sullivan tried to kill her in 2014. Now, she presented to the television station the police record, the photos that were taken at the hospital. She had massive bruises on her neck, her eye. She lost her teeth. It was a beating like none other. She survived. He punched her more than 20 times and choked her, resulting in that punctured eye. He took a plea deal. This is a man with an experience with plea deals. He took a plea deal for aggravated assault and was sentenced to 2.5 years behind bars and 4 years of probation. Timothy was still on probation when he started dating Ruby. This is why I'm so angry.
And it could be part of the reason that the district attorney was at a second-degree murder, because, again, not being familiar with the Arizona Penal Code, but generally speaking, if you commit a similar crime while you're on probation, there are certain sentencing structures that are taken off the table, like probation is no longer on the table. And low term, a lot of these cases will have predeterminate sentencings. There's what's called a low term, a mid term, and a high term. And if you're on probation and do it again, you lose the low term. They know if they successfully prosecute him for second-degree murder, whether it's a plea bargain or a jury trial, that he's going to be in jail for, say, 12 years. Now, again, I'm not advocating for that, but I understand that might be part of the filing process, that they know that he is going to be locked up for quite some time.
So if I understand you correctly, that because of the circumstances, he will be in prison for so long that ultimately it could be equivalent to almost a murder one charge.
Generally speaking, if you're on probation and you commit the same crime, the sentencing is much more harsh, for any sort of a sentence for a similar type of a crime. Now, he committed a murder, and, it's, there are advocates. The reason there are advocacy groups for these domestic violence types of issues is I saw those same pictures that you were describing and you were showing, and they go into a system, a court system, and 2 years in probation. And generally the probation, not knowing, but generally probation would be like anger management classes, type of a thing. And maybe some people, they come through that process and they come out the other side and they're better folks for it. However, the risk of a man that, number one, a man that would strike a woman, much less multiple times and, break her orbital socket and choke her to where there's I'm thinking anger management probably isn't,
too far. Yeah. What? I got no sympathy for this guy. Yeah. Timothy Sullivan has been charged with second-degree murder, and I hope they lock him up for life and they throw away the key. I got no sympathy here for him.
Yeah, I'm joining your club on that. It's, I suppose we can look at it like he got another bite at the apple, and this is what he did as a result. And so, I have zero sympathy here.
Zero.